Zuko spent 3 years sailing the ocean looking for a bald 12-year-old because his dad told him it was the only way to come home. His dad also burned half his face off for speaking out of turn at a meeting. Avatar handled abusive parenting with a level of precision that most adult dramas don't even attempt. This is what Zuko's story teaches us about toxic parents. There's something strange about how Avatar: The Last Airbender builds its central villain. For almost 2 seasons, Ozai is everywhere and nowhere all at once. The show's creators have talked about keeping him in the shadows on purpose, and it obviously works as a tension device. He's arguably one of the most memorable villains in cartoon history. But I think there's also a deeper reason that it works as well as it does. We as human beings are wired to read faces. That's how we connect, how we predict, how we empathize, how we figure out what the other person is feeling. Take the face away, and you take away the audience's ability to humanize someone. But what really hit me on a rewatch is that this is also just what it feels like to grow up with a parent like Ozai. Enormous, omnipresent, never fully visible. You spend your whole childhood reacting to someone you can't quite see or understand clearly, so you never quite figure out what's going to make them happy or what makes them tick. You're always guessing, and you're always bracing for the worst. When he finally does show up, when Zuko comes home at the start of Book 3 after 3 years of exile and approximately 10,000 mentions of his honor, Ozai welcomes him back. And it's completely unsettling, because you know what it cost Zuko to get back to that room, and you can tell that even now, he doesn't feel safe. Now, before we get into what Ozai's parenting philosophy does to his children, it helps to understand what he actually believes. Because he does have a worldview, and everything he does follows from it with this horrible internal logic that almost makes sense if you don't think too hard about the fact that it's coming from a guy who burned his own kid and is trying to take over the world. And I think the clearest window into it doesn't actually come from the show, but from the Promise comics, set after the war. Zuko is Fire Lord now, and he's stuck on a decision about Fire Nation colonists living in Earth Kingdom territory. He can't figure out what to do. So he does something kind of embarrassing and goes to his dad's prison cell for advice. Ozai tells him a story about 3-year-old Zuko on Ember Island watching a hawk attack a turtle crab. Little Zuko saves the crab, then realizes that he's condemned the hawk to starve. So now he's stuck between 2 impossible choices, until a wave knocks him into the ocean and Ozai jumps in to save him. Dad of the year behavior right there, right? But what Ozai says next is what tells us exactly the kind of mindset this guy operates with. What I'm trying to say is, there's no right or wrong apart from what you decide. Whom you choose to defend deserves to be defended simply because you chose them. You are the Fire Lord. What you choose, by definition, is right. And there's just a sliver of useful insight in there if you squint hard enough. Because yeah, for sure, a leader has to commit. Indecision is in and of itself a decision, but that's not really what Ozai is saying. What he's saying is that the strongest person in the room gets to decide what's right, and everyone else just has to live with it. Right and wrong don't really actually exist for him, only power. Which is actually a step further than where the Fire Nation started. His grandfather Sozin began the 100-Year War with what is, on paper, the classic colonizer's justification. The Fire Nation is the most prosperous and advanced civilization in the world, and it's their duty to share that greatness with everyone else. It's self-serving, it's destructive, but at least it's trying to dress itself up as generosity. Ozai doesn't even bother with any of that. 3 generations later, the moral cover is just gone. He didn't conquer the Earth Kingdom because he thought it was some kind of righteous thing to do, to share his prosperity with them. He did it because he was Fire Nation, and the Fire Nation needed to grow, and because he could. The other nations aren't even enemies exactly, they're just the turtle crab, the prey for a predator.
You're weak, just like the rest of your people. They did not deserve to exist in this world, in my world.
This isn't ego in the normal sense, it's closer to a theological conviction. Ozai genuinely believes that reality is structured around him and the Fire Nation. He is what fire is, consuming, necessary, cosmically entitled. What's going on with Ozai psychologically is what people sometimes call the dark triad. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy manifesting inside him as deep emotional coldness. And when these 3 traits show up together, they tend to produce a very specific kind of parent. The kind who runs hot and cold depending on what the kid is doing for them at any given moment. Warm when you're doing a good job at propping up the parent's image, cold when you're not, and then warm again, just often enough that you can never stop trying. The warmth is actually what does the real damage, because it feels real, and you can never tell when it's about to disappear, and you're always seeking it, because it's always just beyond the next corner. He didn't come up with any of this on his own either, which is worth saying. He was Azulan's second son, which meant he grew up watching his dad pour everything into Iroh, and he had to claw and conspire his way to a seat at the table that was never even meant for him. And someone who grew up fighting for conditional love and won doesn't tear the system down when they get to the top, they just put themselves at the middle of it and run it again, becoming their parent. So he didn't invent any of this, he inherited it, and made it worse. You could say he was also a victim of it and then passed it on, which is part of the problem. In families organized around a parent, or, God forbid, parents like this who act like authoritarians, the children tends to get sorted early into roles that serve the parent rather than the well-being of the children. One becomes the golden child. This child is the one whose success reflects the parent's greatness, whose excellence is proof of the parent's excellence. The other becomes the scapegoat, the one who carries everything the parent needs to push away from themselves, the failure, the weakness, the shame. The roles aren't based on who the kids actually are, they're based on what the parents need them to be to keep feeling good about themselves. In the Fire Nation royal family, the sorting happens before Zuko can even walk. There's a line that Zuko says in the show that gets expanded on much more in the comics. At the dinner table when they were kids, Azula brags about humiliating her firebending teacher, and Zuko tries to defend him. Ozai slams his fist on the table, and then doesn't just compare Zuko to his sister, he goes all the way back to infancy. He tells the boy that when he was born, there was no spark in his eyes, no signs of bending, and Ozai planned to throw him out of the palace. And if it weren't for the boy and the fire sages who pleaded for the boy to get a chance at all, he probably wouldn't have even been there. Then he hits him with,
"My father says she was born lucky. He says I was lucky to be born."
The comics also add something else on top of this. Ursa, at some point, was seemingly writing fake letters to a man from her past named Ikem. In one of them, she implied that Zuko might actually be his son. But the whole thing was actually a trap to test whether her correspondence was being intercepted by Ozai, because that's the kind of household this was. Adults running counterintelligence operations on each other while their kids got death threats. Ozai, of course, saw through this immediately and told Ursa that he had killed the man just to mess with her head. Ursa snapped and came clean, but said that she really did wish Zuko were not his, if it meant that he wouldn't turn out like him. Ozai grinned and said from now on that he'd treat Zuko as if he were not his, as if he were a bastard, just to make her feel it, to fulfill her wish. Which means that the cruelty that defined Zuko's whole childhood isn't just because he isn't as good and useful as his sister was to Ozai's ambitions, but was because he was a means for Ozai to exert his dominance inside his own house, to be cruel to his own wife, to prove that he was the king of the world and his own family. This is what narcissistic scapegoating actually looks like. It's not really about the child at all. The child just becomes the container for everything the parent needs to externalize, and the assignment has almost nothing to do with who the child actually is. It's never really the child's fault. Children are innocent, and they become containers for their parents' hatred and narcissism and cruelty. A few years later, with Ozai now on the throne, 13-year-old Zuko sneaks into a war council thanks to Iroh. He hears a general propose using new recruits as sacrificial bait on the front lines, and speaks up for their lives. Now, for any parent, this might have been a proud moment. Zuko, being the crown prince, was next in line to be the Fire Lord, and he was acting so empathetically for his own people, so for him to have such strong opinions could have been a teachable moment. Well, it was, but in a very different way. By Ozai's logic, what Zuko did was an act of humiliation. But Zuko didn't dishonor the general, he dishonored Ozai by implying that what was happening in that room required correction, and that he needed to be the one to correct it, not Ozai. This led to the infamous Agni Kai. Zuko, thinking that he was going to face the general, turned around to see his father as his opponent.
"Please, father, I only had the Fire Nation's best interest at heart. I'm sorry I spoke out of turn."
He drops to his knees and appeals to love and mercy.
You will learn respect, and suffering will be your teacher.
This is what it costs to be the turtle crab in this relationship. The banishment looks like abandonment, but functions more like a leash. Zuko has to capture the Avatar who's been missing for 100 years, and only then can he come home. Ozai knows that this was not a realistic mission. But a son chasing his father's approval across the ocean is still, in a very real sense, under control, doing what his father wants. The banishment restructures the whole relationship around Zuko's permanent debt, his need to regain his honor, as if it's for him and not for Ozai. Zhao tells Zuko to his face in Season 1 that his father doesn't actually want him back, and Zuko immediately challenges him to an Agni Kai.
If your father really wanted you home, he would have let you return by now. Avatar or no avatar.
You don't fight someone for saying something that you know isn't true. When Zuko does come home, falsely credited with taking out the Avatar and welcomed back as a hero, he's the most miserable that we've ever seen him. He says on the beach that he has everything he ever wanted, his old life, his father's approval, so everything should be fine. But
I should be happy now, but I'm not. I'm angrier than ever and I don't know why.
He doesn't know yet, but the answer was always there. You can't extract warmth from someone who doesn't have any to give. The most heated dad, both metaphorically and literally, didn't have any actual love to give him. This homecoming just makes that impossible to look away from, and it makes his eventual redemption that much better. But before we get to that, we have to talk about Ozai's second child as well, because his relationship with Azula looks like the opposite of what it does to Zuko. But the word to use isn't better or anything. It's not like he's a better parent to her. What he does to Zuko was abusive, and what he does to Azula was also abusive and enabling. And both of these behaviors actually have the same roots in Ozai's Machiavellianism. This form of abuse, this enabling, was just because she was useful to him, because her talent made him look good, the opposite side of the coin to Zuko. Every time she did well, it confirmed something he wanted to believe about himself. Watch how he actually praises her across the show, and it's never really her, it's always what she can do for him. She's a firebending prodigy, a perfectionist. She's uncompromising, she's ruthless, capable of outwitting people more than twice her age. He approves of her the way that you'd approve of a tool that keeps working, that keeps serving its master well. People tend to feel that the golden child has it better somehow. But more often than not, that's not really the case. It just looks like one if you're standing on the outside. But really, the pressure, the need for perfectionism, it gets to them too, as it does to Azula at the end of her arc. Zuko's suffering is obvious, and it's brutal, but because it's so visible, you sympathize more with him, and he eventually gets the distance he needs to see that system for what it is, and to try to undo all that damage. Azula doesn't get that distance. She doesn't even get the chance. She gets enmeshed completely instead, which means her whole identity gets built around whatever Ozai approves of, and she never really gets the chance to figure out who she is outside of that. Everyone around her calls her a prodigy, a genius, and so she absorbs that idea of her so completely that anything below it is failure. She ends up driving herself crazy because of this.
Almost perfect. One hair out of place.
Almost isn't good enough.
There's also the fact that she knows, on some level, exactly what happens when you mess up in this family. Her mother disappeared without a trace. Her uncle lost the throne at his lowest. She watched her brother drop to his knees and beg, and she watched their father burn him anyway. Every time Zuko got confirmed as the failure, Azula got validated as not Zuko, and that difference between them is her margin of safety. She needs that to stay as wide as possible, which is a big part of why she needs him to always be there and to keep losing compared to her. You can actually see much of this play out in real time during the Ember Island episode in Season 3, which is one of the funniest and saddest episodes the show ever did. There's a beach party where Azula tries to flirt with a boy. She takes Ty Lee's advice to basically just smile and laugh at everything he says, and Azula's response to that is,
Well, that sounds really shallow and stupid. Let's try it.
She gets the kiss, and then she does what any normal teenager would do after that first kiss, which is to tell the boy that together they will be the strongest couple in the entire world and dominate the earth. Right? Of course you've done that after your first kiss. Now, some people might be into that, but this kid was not. So he runs. He saw the crazy. But underneath the comedy is, again, something genuinely painful, which is that this is a 14-year-old girl who has absolutely no idea how to be a person outside of a power dynamic. She has one mode: command, control, power. And outside of that mode, she is completely, hopelessly lost. Later that night at a bonfire on the beach, everyone is sharing their sad backstories. And when it's Azula's turn, she sort of waves it off at first, saying that she doesn't have a sob story like the rest of them, that she could complain about how their mom liked Zuko more, but she doesn't really care. And yet, she still says this.
My own mother thought I was a monster. She was right, of course, but it still hurt.
Now, I don't think there's any secret that Ursa loved both of her children, and she even confirmed it herself, but it's also completely true that she couldn't get through to Azula the way that she could with Zuko. Azula was always her father's child in temperament, and Ursa, who, when she wasn't fearing for Zuko, was trapped inside a marriage that she didn't choose inside of a palace that she couldn't leave, and she had a much harder time connecting with Azula. So Azula, of course, has to lean on the one person in the house who didn't flinch at her darkness. Ozai praises her for exactly the things that Ursa worries about. He's the only person who looks at her and sees something that he likes, and Azula knows this. And then, when Ursa's gone, the one counter voice, the one meaningful, empathetic, parenting voice, is gone as well. All that's left is Ozai. So Azula spends her formative years becoming the most perfect, ruthless reflection of what he wants. And it kind of works well for her, until it doesn't anymore. All of a sudden, her lifelong friends, Mai and Ty Lee, stop fearing her and stab her in the back to help Zuko, who by now had found his purpose and recognized his family for what they really were and left them to join the gang. And before Azula could actually recover from this, moments before Sozin's Comet, when Ozai was leaving to burn the entire Earth Kingdom, he tells her that he's not taking her. This was her campaign, her idea. She pushed herself into that war meeting to make it happen, and he hands her the empty title of Fire Lord while naming himself Phoenix King, because at the end of the day, Azula was just a tool for his ambitions.
You can't treat me like this! You can't treat me like Zuko!
She feels herself falling off that pedestal in the eyes of the one person she put all of her faith in, the one person who really mattered when it came to her self-image. And now that Zuko's gone, there's no scapegoat left in the family. There's no one left below her on the ladder. All of the pressure that used to fall on Zuko now falls on her. The whole psychotic breakdown past that point makes complete sense after this. The servants getting dismissed one by one, the hair situation, the hallucinations of Ursa coming back and telling her that she did love her, which Azula can't accept even though she knows it deep down, because it contradicts everything that she decided when she was 9 and built her entire identity around. She ends this war chained to a grate, sobbing, and never fully recovers from her psychosis, even in the comics, because fear had always been the only currency she knew. Zuko got something Azula never did. He gets unconditional love and accepts it, first from his mother, then from everyone's favorite Uncle Iroh, and then from the entire gang. Despite the events at the end of Ba Sing Se, where Zuko chose Azula and his father's approval over the one person who had always been there for him, Iroh never fully turns his back on Zuko. He never gives up on him. Even in prison, he offers him advice that eventually helps him finally overcome his internal struggle and confront his father about every horrible thing on that day of the Black Sun. But fully crediting Iroh for Zuko's redemption would be doing a disservice to Zuko himself and the internal struggle he had to go through for the whole run of the show. Zuko always had a caring side to him that his father tried to root out as weakness. We saw it very early on in Season 1. But what the Banishment actually gave Zuko, besides the years of misery and a really unfortunate series of haircuts, was the opportunity to see the world outside the palace, to see how other people treated their kids, to see what life was really like outside that controlling structure where he didn't receive commands from his authoritarian father, just like his uncle did when he was young. He now had perspective. He walked through villages that his family's war had burned and saw what it actually looked like up close. And even in the middle of all that, even without Iroh standing over his shoulder, his conscience kept showing up on its own. In Zuko alone, he defends a kid from Earth Kingdom soldiers and then reveals that he's actually Fire Nation, knowing that it's going to turn the whole village against him. Nobody told him to do that. Nobody was watching. That's just who he is when he isn't being forced to do something by an external hand. He would always pick the turtle crab because the turtle crab can't fight back. So Iroh's guidance definitely made the journey shorter, but the thing that actually got Zuko out was something he already had in him. He just needed enough distance from his father's world to find it. For Azula, it's not that there's no Iroh, I mean he's right there, it's that there's no outside of her father's demands. Ursa is gone. Mai and Ty Lee were friends, sort of, but Azula held those friendships together through fear, because it's the only thing she knows. And unlike Zuko, she was never thrown out of the palace and given her own chance to find herself. She was never forced to live in the real world. Every room that she ever walked into was a room where she was Princess Azula, where she commanded fear, where she commanded others bow to her the way that she bowed to her father. The beach episode was probably the closest we as the audience came to seeing what she was actually like as a person underneath all of that. But even then, she kept her guard up and couldn't be vulnerable with anyone. What Ozai ran as a father was a cruel system, one where love, for the lack of a better word, was the reward for output. where the rules shifted without warning, where you were always being evaluated, walking on turtle duck shells, and the results never got posted. They just lifted the standard that much higher. And the insidious thing about a system like that is that it produces children who believe in it and perpetuate it, who carry that scorecard around with them long after they've left the house and keep grading themselves against the standards that were never real. Now, spoilers, at the end of Smoke and Shadow, Ursa visits Ozai in his cell. Yep, she's still alive. And she says what I think is the most precise thing anyone says in this entire story about him. He is a small man trying to act big. He has a heart too small for his son, his daughter, his brother, or even himself. And that's the last we ever see of him. That is the conclusive clause to describe what kind of person he and people similar to him really are. Zuko spent most of the show convinced that he was the problem, that there was some threshold that he hadn't crossed, even though it was just over the horizon, some performance that he hadn't nailed, something that he could do to gain his father's love and respect that would finally help him redeem his honor, whatever that really means. Azula would have had to come to the same realization and unlearn those toxic standards that she and her father set for her, but she never got there, because the exit Zuko found was never really available to her, and she felt perfectly fine inside her gilded cage, right up until it turned on her, and by then, there was nothing outside it to catch her. 2 kids, 1 household, and the same impossible job earned the love of a man who was not capable of giving it. One of them eventually stopped trying and found themselves. The other could never break out of that conditioning. And what separates those 2 outcomes, more than talent or bending or any of the things the show frames as important to them, is whether someone in their life ever gave them love without needing something in return. If you've had the kind of parent that we've talked about, not necessarily one that can shoot fire out of their mouth and their hands, but maybe metaphorically, let us know in the comments down below. Every story is valuable, and I'm sure people would be able to learn from your experience. Maybe you've had a parent who was narcissistic or Machiavellian, or who wanted you to be something for them, who needed to control you because you were an extension of them instead of just a receptacle for their love. Let us know. Your story is valuable, your life is valuable, your love is valuable. You can be the one to break that cycle and give the next generation the love it deserves. And if you want to know more about the man who did that for Zuko and what it cost him to become that kind of person that he became, that's the video right there. Like, subscribe, check that video out, and we'll see you next time. Peace.